everybody, Tony D and Little Joan here with final hot take of the evening. You know, it's just so much news, so many things that just keep coming at you, and it's really hard to process. It really is. I don't have all the answers, and well, I mean, I do eventually, but I don't have them all right away. The thing is, you gotta hunt down your own news, right? You gotta figure stuff out for yourself. And it's really hard to find news sources that are good. Because news sources today, they sort of come and go. They're sort of good for a while, they're good for certain things, they're good for a time, and then they kind of just die. Now, this wasn't always the case. For a long time, the New York Times was considered a great source of news, and it was, because that was an era of newspapers where basically reporters were allowed to do their jobs, where they were considered valuable. And yes, they had propaganda at the time, but it wasn't like it is today. The New York Times now is essentially a website, an $800 million website, which I can't see sustaining itself in the long term. I really can't. They now have driven out the last of the moderates in the New York Times, and the Marxists are going to roam free, and they are going to start saying crazy S over at the New York Times. Oh, you think some of their articles were crazy before? The article I read the other day about the racist traffic signals, oh, that'll be just like regular news to them. We're going to start seeing a lot of crazy stuff come out of the New York Times. And I'm sure there's going to be more instances of racism at the New York Times too. They just, these Marxists or intersectional feminists or BLM or Antifa or left extremists, whatever you want to call them, they are very stubborn people. They're determined to show you that the way you do things is somehow wrong because it's rooted in any sort of tradition. And when they can't immediately show you that, or when they can't show you it at all, they just revert back to calling you a Nazi and running away. That's exactly what the New York Times is going to do until somebody says, you know what, this isn't making any money. Shut it down or fire everybody and let's get some actual reporters in here. They are in for a major downsizing. Not now. They're still hanging on. They're still resting on their laurels. There's still money to be made in that brand. But that is because of really good corporate people. There are people in advertising and in the corporate world that can literally make money out of S. They could just turn it into money. They're really good at it. If you have a good enough brand that still has some credibility, you can make money. You can make money if you have money. Now, granted, you're usually taking, say, $100 million and you're turning it into $50 million, which isn't a great profit margin, but still, it's a big profit margin when you think about it, because it's still millions of dollars. But you look down the road, I mean, you're going to have readership just die off. I think that'll be the main thing that kills the New York Times. People just won't read it because the people who read newspapers will be all dead. Or mostly dead, or dead enough that, the readership just won't matter anymore. There won't be paper New York Times anymore. It'll just be a website. And it only takes one really bad incident for somebody to go, oh my God, why am I paying for this? Again, I'm seeing, short videos of people who clearly were social justice warriors or pretty hard lefties, not super hard lefty, obviously, because suddenly they've gotten red-pilled because they realize, my God, I'm being lied to. I have been lied to all this time. This is a nightmare. And they're realizing the sort of culture war is upon us. But there's plenty of people who aren't being reached, and a lot of those people, they're just not on the internet. So they just don't care. Now, to a certain extent, that actually is going to hurt leftists in the culture war, because when they do make these extreme sort of strides, and they always do, they always overreach, that's when normal people go, what? No, I'm against that. And they get a hard stance finally out of them. Now, they may not connect that back to the Democrats yet, but they connect it to, like, well, I definitely don't like this. So I think it's important, and I think I've said this before, but I wanted to kind of say it again. You got to have your own news sources. You got to go on the internet. You got to really dig deep. And you have to be prepared pretty much to replace everything in terms of your browser and what you search, right? So, because even your browser is suspect. Even the Chrome, like a Chrome browser or the Internet Explorer, those are suspect, because you can't be guaranteed that Google and Internet Explorer aren't gaming the system. And I'm pretty sure Google is, for their search engine. So you also have to look to lesser known search engines, lesser known browser systems like, what's that new one? Oh gosh, Brave. It's called Brave. I tried it. I didn't quite understand it, and I got all my passwords saved in Chrome, so I haven't quite made the leap yet, but I may still make the leap. And it's the same thing with YouTube versus BitChute, Twitter versus Parler and Gab. You got to start looking for alternate means, and they won't always be good. They won't be good forever, so you can't get locked into them to the point of like, oh yeah, I always go there. You got to like kind of have a varied diet of different people. So, I can give you I can rattle off some of the ones I listen to, but understand that I'm sort of further along the path. And, when you sort of do these, when you're kind of a news junkie, you kind of don't need to hear every single story over and over again, because the news can be very repetitive. And then, there's a matter of time. When I have time, I like to hear all the nitty gritty. But when I don't have time, I'm kind of like just sort of getting the gist of it, and like going, oh, okay, I get the story, and then moving on. And some people, like Tim Pool, as one of his fans, who I met at the Minds in Real Life event, said, you could really just listen to Tim Pool for the first 5 minutes and you're good. And yeah, he's right, because he structures his videos kind of like a newspaper column. He states the big ideas in the beginning, and then he breaks it down as you get further along. But I'll just rattle off a few things that you could try to get into. But, again, if you're kind of new to getting your stuff off the internet, you might want to sort of build to these guys, maybe not jump into it. For me, I am, for a writer, I'm a terrible reader. I cannot retain anything in my brain unless it's a video. Videos I can retain, because I have this thing where, I listen to somebody talk, and if I like the way they talk, it stays with me more. Whereas words, it doesn't stay with me as much. I forget things I read. But that's just me. So I watch a lot of videos. I tend to watch more videos than I actually read articles. But I watch Sargon of Akkad. Right now he's just doing one video a day. He does Akkad daily, and then sometimes he'll do a stream, which will be really long, which I usually can't watch the whole thing. I don't have the time, sadly. Every morning I watch Sticks and Hammers 666. He's pretty good for some of the news stories. He's currently living in Amsterdam, so sometimes he's running like a day behind. But he's good. He's good for political analysis. And I like his commentary. Tim Pool, of course. I watch the news reports. I don't watch a lot of the Tim podcasts. It's a little more rambly, and I don't have the time. But once in a while, if it's something real juicy, I'll tune in. Um, yeah, as a comic guy, I'm into the world of comics, so I subscribe to Yellow Flash and your boy Zach at Comics Matter. I also subscribe to Comics Pro Secrets, Ethan Van Sciver, although I don't watch him all that much because, um, and actually all three of them I don't watch as much because they tend to run the same ground over and over again. Um, and it's just, I tune in once in a while to sort of get the lay of the land in the comic book industry. Then there's the Quartering and Midwestly with Jeremy. And he's pretty good. The Midwestly stuff is more for his commentary, and the Quartering's more for games and comics and geek stuff. Then there's Black Pigeon Speaks, which is a very cool channel. I like to watch him. The Voltaire. He's got a new channel, which I was trying to think of the name. I think it's called Endeavor Capitalist or something like that. I'm sure there's a link under Voltaire. But he's pretty good. Sinatra Says. Watch him sometimes. And I follow a lot of these guys on Twitter and Parler. And Razor Fist, of course. Razor Fist is a lot of fun. He just put out a video today all about gun control and how it's dead. Good rant. Good rant. And he does a lot of video game stuff as well. So it kind of depends on what you're interested in. And for me, I check out, the written stuff I check out are Deadline, Variety, and Hollywood Reporter for some of the Hollywood stuff. And I like to keep apprised of the inner workings of Hollywood, so I can do Hollywood and just sort of generally be apprised of show business, writing screenplays. You kind of got to know something's going on, right? So those sources of news, though, may not be right for you. They may be too opinionated. They may not jibe well. You may not like everybody. But, I would think about getting on YouTube. Definitely get on BitChute. Be careful going down the rabbit hole of BitChute. There's some very strange things on BitChute. But, expand your horizons a little bit and unplug from TV and newspapers because it's just gotten very bad. It's just gotten very bad. I wouldn't trust anything anymore. I really wouldn't, especially when it comes to politics. They're just, about the only thing I could stomach is kind of your local news for just the local stories. When the local news does national stories, they're in the can from the national network and they're usually terrible. But I studied communication, so I kind of know how it works. Back in the day, I would do my own version of the news where we'd get stories off the AP wire. We actually had a subscription, the radio station, and the AP would just shoot out paper all day long with news stories, and you could just rip them off the wire and rewrite them and do your own version of that news story. And that's what you paid for with the AP wire. So you could do the news your own way. And it wasn't like you were confirming these stories. You were just assuming the AP, Associated Press, was being accurate. And these days you can't even assume that. So assume nothing, trust no one, and get on the internet and do your own research. Especially if it's a topic that's important to you and you want to really know about it. The whole thing about the beer virus is something you should really dig into because, man, there's a lot of information out there. And you shouldn't just run around scared all the time and unknowledgeable. It can be a little overwhelming on the internet. I know a lot of you, if you're older, it's just like, who do you listen to? But, have patience, tune in to people for a while and, compare them to other news sites. And sometimes I would compare guys to other news sites, regular quote-unquote news sites, and go, this guy's crazy. And I'd stop for a while, but then later I'd realize, mainstream news lied to me too. And then I'd go back to him. They're not all perfect, even the alt stuff. So, alt tech stuff. So you gotta find your way. But newspapers and TV, no longer.